Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. Andrew, aka d.r.u, here, and I am lucky to be joined by the wonderful producer Saulz. He has a track out right now with with a singer named Teha called "Let You Lie." I first met Saulz via Evoked Natives, I believe, which is a label that both of us have releases on, and he was kind enough with Ridden to do a remix for my track with Pip Lewis, which was super cool. Go and check that out. But I will link to this Let You Lie below. I was really impressed on not only the songwriting, but also just the general tightness of the mix, the vocal production, and Josh, aka Saulz. We're gonna keep it personal today and call him Josh, but he's been kind enough to offer a view into the session. He's gonna let us ask him some questions about his track, and I hope that this will help some producers out there. So, Saulz, I love the track. Did you have any specific inspiration for it, or like tell me about how it came to life?
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you for having me. Really excited to do this. As far as inspiration, it's a tough one for me to talk about because I started this instrumental actually back in 2020, so more than 3 years ago. And I didn't really touch it in 21 and 22 and picked it back up this year and kind of finished the production off and decided I really wanted to get a vocalist to sing on it and release it. So I don't really remember what was going through my mind when I started it. I know what kind of artists I was listening to. I know the vibe I was kind of going for. I was listening to a lot of like Akali and Flume and Odeza and Zed's Dead and like Elenium and stuff like that. So definitely like trap, future bass was a heavy inspiration for me at that point. But again, I wasn't even thinking vocals when I wrote the instrumental back then. So I think I was just running with the sounds and seeing what inspired me in the moment.
Okay, awesome. To me, it gives me this sort of like gray vibe or like future bass with the singer, with the like the structure of the song and the singer being up front. It has a real sort of radio friendly commercial feel to it. With regards to Teha, did you work with her on the song, or did you do like demo recording, or what was that whole recording process like?
Sure. So I actually kind of put the instrumental out to a few vocalists I knew in the area. Um, I felt like a female's voice was definitely the way to go on this just because the instrumentation I used, I felt like that would fit best. She replied, she was into it. I kind of let her run wild with it and didn't really hear any ideas she had until we met up for the first session to do scratch tracks, which is where we just record demo vocals, maybe produce them a little bit, maybe we change some words around, get a better idea of how the song flows. Might change some of the arrangement in the production at that point, and then we kind of broke for a couple weeks, came back and recorded final vocals, but most of the lyrics were her. So
Awesome, super cool. So, once you get the scratch track, did you produce a little bit more around the instrumental, or did you get like an idea as to how you were planning on to recording it? And I've seen from social media, should definitely everybody go check out Saul's music, but you have quite an extensive recording and engineering background. You could tell us a little bit about that, but I imagine your mic choice and you doing scratch tracks in the demo process gives you the ability to sort of plan the final session and make that run smoother.
yeah, I don't always like plan on doing scratch tracks, and I wouldn't necessarily say I planned on it in this case. I usually plan that first vocal session, and if it turns out we get final vocals, great. I'm certainly recording with the idea that they could be final vocals, so I'm recording at the same quality with like the same mic and the same signal chain that I normally would. But doing that definitely helps not only the vocalist, but I think it helps me because, like you said, I can go back to the drawing board for the next 2 weeks before we kind of get back together. And I do mess around with the production a little bit. I think some of the vocal chops that I actually ended up using in the drop are still from the scratch vocals that we recorded. So if I feel like I'm going to do any creative vocal chopping or effects, I might just use the scratch vocals for that since I already
Yeah, for
have them.
sure. Awesome. Very cool. And do you think like with a singer, if you present them a track that's polished and as close to the finish line minus their vocal as possible, that like gives them more energy or makes them more excited to record?
That's always been my goal. It's hard to say. I think every vocalist is a little bit different. Some of them actually I feel like work better with more of a canvas and less instrumentation going on, and then with that stuff getting filled in later. And I feel like some of them are the opposite, where they really do want to hear a finished product and hear exactly where their voice is going to fit in. For me, I usually take the approach, I try to take it as far as I can production wise before bringing a vocalist in. That's just what I've always liked to do. I think when I start off writing a song, I'm not always planning for it to have vocals. So even this one, I probably wrote it with the idea that it might have been instrumental. And at a certain point, I just said, this has got to have vocals. So
Okay, cool. And when you got to the point with vocals, did you have to take a melody out, or did you, was it just
yeah, there were definitely some melodic
dead?
parts in the verses
Okay,
that when I initially write, I usually have melody and top
right.
line, throughout. And if I do end up adding a vocalist on, yeah, I'll have to pare some of that stuff back or, use different instruments, tuck it into the background a little bit.
Okay, for sure. And tell us about the actual like mics. What was your recording chain on this vocal?
Yeah, sure. So we used a Neumann TLM 103 for the lead vocals, which is like my mic of choice. I would say 90% of the time. That's what I'm using on vocalists. And then for the harmonies and background vocals, I actually used this SM7B, which is another thing I do quite often, just to get some natural separation between the lead vocals and the backgrounds and harmonies before even doing any processing in Ableton or in my DAW. I just find it's nice, to have two different microphones with totally different frequency responses and color qualities to just get some separation on
Cool.
them and record in.
And then with the mics, you're going into a universal audio. Is that right? And
Yeah, that's right.
doing some
Everything
unison.
goes through my Apollo. Yep.
And I think you told me you're using an Avalon preamp, which is like a little bit of compression.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Avalon's another thing that's usually my go-to. But
Okay.
I do throw a little bit of compression on going in just to tame some of the peaks, not too much, but I do like to compress on recording a little bit.
Okay. Awesome. Very cool. Well, again, you definitely do a lot of stuff besides just producing music. You do, it seems, looks like live sound and a lot of recording for other people, and you are educated in that audio world.
Yeah, so my background is more in audio engineering than it is in producing. I got my start, I would say, when I was like 12 or 13. It's hard to even remember the exact age. I just know I was like late middle school, kind of going into high school. I was playing in a band. That band wanted to record a record, and I kind of took it upon myself to get all the equipment and figure out how to do it. And I really enjoyed the process. So from that point on, I just started building up and I remember buying like at that time it was the MXL 770, like your typical $60 large diaphragm condenser mic and a little two input interface and just kind of slowly building up my equipment. And I was recording for some local musicians, a lot of rap, a lot of pop, singer songwriter stuff. And I did that all through high school and started trying to get involved in local studios and just network in the music industry in my area. And turned out I kept enjoying it through high school and pursued a degree in sound recording technology in college. So that's really my background, and then I didn't get into producing until like 2018.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your background. I mean, it explains a lot. Again, everyone, if you haven't already paused this video and listened to Let You Lie, definitely should. Sounds top notch in recording and in mix. Do you mind hopping into the session and talking a little bit about what you do once you have a vocal and the kind of
Yeah,
things you're doing to make this really come together? Because
yeah, absolutely.
we've on this channel have talked a lot about music theory. Makes sense because music theory logic. So in terms of like note choice, scales, keys, melodies, rhythms. But then in the modern world, there's a lot of overlap with not just the notes you're using, but using software. There's the audio side of things, which is how the music comes out through. Um, sorry, I just saw your message. It's all good. Should have done that before, but there's the music itself, and then there's how we get that music sounding big through speakers, right? And all the different technology that helps us to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, 50% of the battle. Just half of it is, sound choice and selection and going through the production process. But Even if you do all that right, like the mixing process is still so important. And I really feel like as someone who got into production kind of late in the game, or what I consider to be late in the game, I'm really glad that I have the audio background that I do. Um, and I know there's tons of producers out there that don't, and they make stuff that sounds really great, and might not be like technically good in terms of mixing techniques and stuff. And that's another really interesting topic to me, and a rabbit hole we probably don't have time to go down today. But I think the formal mixing training and audio engineering training has really helped me.
Yeah, I really think that like I've gone down the rabbit hole of like studied versus self-taught, and I think that a lot of times people are getting to similar space places with perhaps different methodology. And in terms of audio, there's obviously famous examples of clipping and processing that you wouldn't necessarily like be recommended to do, which produces its own sounds. But let's go ahead and dive into this. So you record the vocal, and do you want to play the verse, or you want to talk about a section?
Sure, yeah. You want to hear the vocals isolated, or we
Um,
can?
yeah, we let's hear just the track, and then you could solo out the vocals
Sure.
at some
Yeah,
point.
let's check out like the back half of the first verse and kind of into the break, and then we'll start soloing things out here.
I've held you for half my life, gripped with pain, you held me tight, safe to fall into submission. Hey, yeah. Thought you would be there right when I called. Said you'd call me, but you know you never did. You said forever we'd be together. Lied to me.
So one
Awesome.
thing I'll point off right off the bat that probably everyone hears when you really sit and listen to that section in particular is there's quite a bit of vocal layering here going on. So that's kind of step one in getting this big vocal sound. I feel like is just understanding that no matter what you do, mixing or mastering or with production, you're never going to get that like commercial vocal sound without those multiple layers.
Yeah, and you do a great job of giving them separation, like the sort of filtered talkback sound or more reverb on one or panned differently. Let's I definitely want to talk about the backing vocals, but with regards to just the main vocal, you get it recorded and then what's your next process? Are we talking Melodyne, auto tune? Um
Yeah, there's quite a tedious process that I go through after I first record a vocal. So before I reach for any plugin, including Melodyne, I'm really just going through and I'm working with the audio files themselves at first. So I'm a big visual person, and I think that a lot of people will tell you don't use your eyes to mix. I think at this stage of a vocal editing session, it can be really helpful. There's a reason that these audio workstations are showing you the waveform. It's because that's important data. So I like to just kind of visually look at the waveform, and you can quickly see if there's spots that really peak and they're going to get really loud. And I'll go in and I'll actually use just manual clip gain on the clips to level out some of those peaks. And what you're seeing here, that's already been done, so it actually looks pretty leveled
right, it
out.
looks even, but it doesn't look squeezed or like that's through compression.
Right. Yeah, and if you had just, first done a take on this vocal, you might have spots that, visibly look like this, and you see that that's going to be
Right.
a extra loud part in the vocal. I like to just take that down before I do any processing.
Okay, so handling the volume. All right,
Yep.
what about rhythmically?
Yeah, rhythmically, I give it time alignment attention if it's needed.
Okay.
In this case, I was pretty lucky to be working with a great vocalist that really had the rhythm down. I don't think I did any time alignment in this case.
Okay.
But sometimes if it needs it, if there's something that really needs to come on the downbeat and it's just a couple split seconds too late, you can back that up slightly. But I like to be really subtle with that. I never really line a vocal up completely on the grid. I like to have some natural flow to it, but I'll
For
do that
sure.
where my ears tell me it's needed.
But
I'm also looking at like breaths and clicks and pops and doing the same thing with ducking those in volume at this point.
And when you do think it needs rhythmic edits, you do it at this stage in Ableton as opposed to in Melodyne or something like that.
Yep, but
Okay.
Melodyne's totally a viable option as well, and I know a lot of people do their
Yeah, I typically I'll do the rhythmic and pitch stuff in
yeah.
Melodyne. But so with this vocal, did you bring it into a Melodyne?
Yeah, I did. So once I've done all that pre-editing, my next step is to bring it into Melodyne
Okay.
um, to get that commercial sound. Sorry to spoil it for all the listeners who might not know the technical side out there, but you're almost always hearing autotune.
Oh yeah, well
Yeah,
that I like to call call it custom tune to people because Melodyne I've done videos breakout videos on that, but it shows you the vocal and then it shows you next to the piano grid so that you can actually see like what note is happening and you can change notes custom. There is like an automated portion of it, but
yeah.
yeah,
People definitely have a big misconception, I think, outside the music world of what we're doing when we're working with Melodyne or an auto tuning tool. You know, we're not making a bad singer good. That's not really what those tools are for. We're just kind of reining in a lot of like the vibrato range on long
right.
tails. Like someone might really put a lot of vibrato in, and you just don't hear that wide of a range in modern commercial music, for better or for worse. If that's the
Yeah,
sound you're going for, you know, we do reach for those tools to rein that in a little bit, get the pitch just that much closer to the true note that it's supposed to be, and
right.
really
Well, I think
begins to
taking
sit
vibrato
well.
out also crosses over to psychoacoustics. So kind of like
Yeah.
how our brains perceive the notes. Like it tells us that the singer has more power there because if they're doing vibrato, we recognize that as pushing it. But yeah, I think one of my main goals with starting this channel was I think it's not just I don't think it's a problem the tools we use to get a commercial sound. Like you said, I mean, there are examples where a team might make somebody who's not the best singer sound great, but for the most part, people that are like sounding great on records sound pretty damn good in the room with you. Um, but it's so difficult in music to figure out who recorded something or to figure out who did the editing or like what's going on with the vocals. So I think that's like the whole purpose of these discussions is to, you know, while we can still talk about it, you know, while you have time to give us to show us this, it's cool to let people in on your tricks. Awesome. So after you take it out of Melodyne, what are we doing? Some compression, some
Yeah, so once I'm kind of done with Melodyne and doing my kind of surgical tuning and all the steps we just talked about, I do usually put it through Antares Auto Tune, which is a kind of an automatic auto tune, just to again adjust that tuning a very slight amount, get everything a little tighter, and that's when I'll start kind of going into my signal chain. So you can see in this case the Melodyne has been frozen, so we don't see that, but still running the auto tune. And this is when I start. In this case, I put on some multi-band compression. I did some full band compression, but this new Xvox plugin I really like by Neuro Audio. It's like a multi-effects processor, but in this case, I'm just using the dynamics portion of it, which I think works really well. Doing some de-essing, soothe. I think every engineer at this point has accepted that this plugin is like part of the music production Bible. It's just really, really a great plugin. Can use it on almost anything. And then I get into my EQs, so I use a pretty basic EQ from FabFilter usually to do some surgical work. And then if I want to add any frequencies, I'll usually reach for something that has a little more analog character to it. I really like this API EQ, and you know, here I'm just doing a little bit of the boost in the mid-high frequency range, just to give the vocals some more presence. And you know, this is obviously different for every vocal, but I do tend to stick to this kind of like compression first, de-essing, move into some subtractive EQ, finish off with some additive EQ. I know there's a lot of debate in terms of order of operations and what to do first and what to do last. I find myself reaching for that general flow
For
most
sure.
often.
On the Avalon, when you're tracking it, are you already doing a low cut
Yeah, I
on
am,
it? Okay.
and I do it again here.
Right. No, I know, but typically like going into the auto tune, like
Yep.
it'll work the best if you've rolled it off. Cool. Awesome. And then from there, it looks like you're sending it to the H delay. Some
Yeah, so
other weird
sometimes I'll do my
compressed.
effects on return channels.
Right.
Sometimes I'll do them. I almost always do them in parallel, like you see here. If you're not an Ableton user, this might be a little foreign, but basically, this is Ableton's way of running an effect in parallel, but on the same channel. So these audio effect racks split it into two channels, and you kind of give yourself this dry wet balance.
Right.
So I'll
In
use these a
Logic,
lot.
it's like we do busing essentially,
Yep. Yeah, and we
um,
have busing here
which you
too, but
also
this is
have.
like a weird kind of internal to this track
Right.
bus.
Cool. And you would do that as opposed to using like the H delay, like wet dry mix knob because
I definitely do both,
okay,
and can't really tell you why. I think in this case, it was probably just I wanted a different delay that I didn't have set up on one of my effects returns already. I have two delays down there,
for sure.
and I was probably pretty confident that I only wanted it on the lead, and so I just dropped it in line. If I look, this might actually, yeah, so this is just a slapback delay, so
Okay.
that's probably why I did that.
Very cool. Um, awesome. So now let's talk these background vocals. So important for the commercial sound. They seem very like separate. Like they don't. Sometimes if you have too many vocals going on and you don't treat them differently, it'll just sound like chaos.
Yep,
There's
totally.
obviously some like reverb and filtering on. You have that like talkback echo sound.
Yeah, definitely.
Or-
So my ad libs get mixed pretty differently. I have double tracks throughout this whole song that get mixed pretty similarly, but I would guess that if we open up this EQ, yep, we have a subtractive EQ that kind of matches what I was doing on the lead vocal, and then I have another EQ where
Oh,
pretty basic, but I'm dipping some of the high frequencies, and that's kind of pushing it back in the mix a little more than that lead vocal, so
okay.
that they're not really fighting for the same position in the mix. But this is really common technique to have two. These aren't harmonies; they're going to be identical takes, but recorded two times. So when they stack on top of each other, they just add a little bit more depth to the overall vocal take. So
So
Her pulses, bodies one with the moonlit sense of what I saw with disbelief late.
and you mean like literally two vocals that were record like they're she's singing the same thing, but she's did it two different times,
yep,
correct? Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So everything
And are you
here is
vocalizing
recorded
that?
twice. Yep. Yeah, I
Okay.
do use vocal line on definitely doubles, a
Right.
lot of harmonies if they need it. I might do it manually, but that's where the time alignment does really come into play. I don't like to adjust the main track too much, but then I do want to mesh everything below that into the same timing of the main track.
Right. Makes it more like a super take as opposed to a real like double sound.
Yeah, it's especially important on like S's and P's and those consonant sounds. If those hit at different times, that's where it becomes really obvious that you're hearing multiple vocal layers. So I
Right.
feel like getting those all to line up between the doubles and harmonies and everything is super important, as tedious as it may be.
Yeah. Well, once upon a time I like did it by hand, but now vocal line makes it a lot easier. So and then
Yep.
that ad lib, that are
Yeah, absolutely. So those
you.
are
Oh,
so really, really wet. A lot of reverb, a lot of long reverb on that. Um, Similar vocal chain. So, kind of my process once I start doing plugin processing here is I'll get the lead sounding really good, and then I copy that chain and use that as my starting point for the other vocals. Because odds are that's going to, the compression's going to match. I might add more compression on the harmonies and the doubles and stuff like that. But I usually use that as my starting point. So in this case, you see I copied this whole chain, probably added a little bit more compression, adjusted some things here and there, and then at the end, I'll do what I feel like needs to be done to add separation to that vocal from the lead. So in this case, I did some Sound Toys plugin. Really, really like both of these a lot. Micro Shift and Radiator. So that's what's given it that less high fidelity sound. And then, well, the Radiator's doing that, and then Micro Shift gives it some stereo width.
Perfect. Do you maybe want to play just the vocal stack together? I'm gonna let my dog Charlie out because he's barking.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was before the session.
Intuition. I've held you for half my life, gripped with pain, you held me tight, safe to fall into submission. Hey, yeah. Thought you'd be there right when I called. Said you'd call me, but you know you never did. You said forever we'd be together. You wouldn't, but I always ran and hid. Lied to me and
That
said
talk back.
it's my fault. It's
Yep.
my
Is
Yeah,
that
you start
something?
hearing some effects that maybe you don't hear in the full mix as much. Have some weird like auto pan effects going on there.
Yeah, lots of really cool stuff. With regards to the what you're calling like Build Vox 1, the lower red one, it sounds like when she was singing that line originally, was that all like in one take in her mind, and did you separate them out, or did she have the idea to have like that talk back? Do you know what I mean?
That talkback was definitely her idea. So this, yeah, build Vokes counter. So we're reading the
And
file
you
name, but we're looking at the same track. So
right when I called. Said you'd call me, but you know you never did. You said
yeah, that was all her idea.
we'd be together. You wouldn't, but I always ran and hid. Lied to me.
But also just the way you're treating all the different layers sounds really cool. Awesome. Let's see here. Let's go to like the drop section. So like this sounds absolutely huge. What's your sort of trick, or sum up like your sound design on the drop sections?
Sure, yeah. Similarly to vocals, same way I got that huge sound is just tons and tons of layering. So something that came after the demo vocal session we ran was this vocal chop. I really knew I wanted vocal chops in the drop, but I also knew I didn't want to just like grab a sample on Splice and chop that. I really wanted it to be a chop of the actual vocals from the song, because you really can perceive the difference when there's that disconnect there. So this is a sample that I was able to grab from Teja's session doing the demo vocals and then chop up into this really cool melodic line for the drop.
Super cool. Trippy as well. It almost doesn't even sound like a vocal chop.
Yeah, and you don't see a lot of processing here, and
Right.
that's kind of because I do a lot of freezing as I work on this stuff.
Okay.
Especially when I'm doing really creative chopping stuff like this. I like to once I get a cool sound, I'll resample it, and then all those effects chains are gone, and I'm just working with a blank slate, and maybe I'll do some more stuff, and I'll freeze it again, and I feel like, one, it saves processing power on your computer, which is important in a session of this size, but I think more importantly, it kind of forces you to commit to that sound and build on what you have, which
Mental.
can be important to actually finish songs and not just keep getting overwhelmed.
I feel like you can constantly alter every single thing in the song. It can definitely be easy to focus, like, oh shoot, like the bass needs to be completely different.
Yep.
So like
Super
what
overwhelming.
chop the audio manually potentially, and then what sort of plugins are you using to manipulate that, if you had to guess? Right.
So this vocal chop, that's a good question. I think to get that kind of pumping sound, I was probably using something like Shaperbox.
Okay.
Or LFO Tool is kind of the same thing, but I tend to use Shaperbox.
Yeah, almost has like a synth type sound to it, like if you're vocoding or using like little altar boy perhaps. um
Probably use,
but
yeah,
yeah,
use a lot of little altar boy. Probably use some of that.
side,
Might
but
use some micro shift.
super cool. So that was like the catalyst, that's the stimulus for the drop, and then everything else was kind of to build upon that.
Right, yeah. So since I had the instrumental mostly finished before we did vocals, I ended up having to rework a lot of the drop around that. But these chords were kind of already there, but I did go back and redo some of my sound design to get them to work better with these vocals. So that whole group kind of sounds like. One thing you'll notice that's consistent throughout this entire session, at least it feels like this to me, I'm sure it feels like this to other listeners as well, is when you solo out groups like this, they sound kind of restricted frequency wise, and kind of dull. And I feel like that's just kind of a battle when you get into mixing something that has this many layers and this many tracks, is you have to get little little more aggressive with your EQs than you typically would, and really decide what frequency range of these sounds is the most important, and kind of cut a lot of the extra stuff out, because there's tons of other tracks that are going to be fighting for that frequency range as well. So when you solo stuff out, like the chords and the bass and stuff, they might sound a little weird on their own, and that's just because there's a million other things that have to fit in those spots. You
So
really have to pick and choose what lives where. And in this song, the
let's hear
drums take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
That probably has the most layers going on here.
Oh wow.
Everything here is drums, and there's, as you can see, quite a bit going on in the drop. I actually have, not something I do often, but I separated out my kick, so I have two groups for drums here. So the drums are definitely taking up a lot of space here.
Really cool sound on the the halftime. Whatever, it sounds almost like a chain or like some sort of Foley.
Oh yeah, you're probably hearing, I have some like weird fills going on in this fill group here.
Yeah, that laugh.
Yep, probably this glass hit maybe.
Yeah. Super cool. So it all comes to life. Yeah, and I think like that, those kind of percussion sounds are what give it a future bass sound. It's not just about like the synth or the speed of the song, but
yeah, lots of unconventional things that aren't drums becoming drums.
right. And like to my brain, like just future genres, when people say that, it's kind of like the new sounds. Like
Yep.
there's still drums, but new sounds. I'll have to send you. I did a bunch of sampling from a kitchen when I was on a trip, and it's kind of fun, like building songs with just
Yep.
kitchen percussions.
That's awesome. That's one thing I've never been good about, and I'm always like, man, I gotta pick up like a little Tascam recorder and just keep it on me always, because I'm always picking from sample banks, and it would be great to just go out and grab something.
But yeah, it's very tedious, like actually chopping and organizing once you're done.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, I guess one of my other questions on this, do you want to just unsolo everything? Or on the, you kind of like just go from one layer outwards, and then we'll go to the other sound effects. But absolutely awesome to see the session, and just very fine work.
Thank you. All right, everything should be open now. Cool. Is there a section in particular you want to hear?
Let's just hear that drop, like what you were just playing.
Sure.
We got it.
I'll give it a few bars back here. And we'll go for the second build, because I really like this part into the second drop.
I called your name, you said it again. One more time, one more time.
Very, very nice. It's really cool hearing the drop after you soloed out the vocal chop and kind of explain that, because like it really, you can just tell how once you had that, everything else was about like matching that in the right way, like the sub line, the everything.
Yeah, yeah, and that was tough because the instrumental, like the drop was full before I came up with that idea. So once I had that, it was all about like getting everything else to support that because that was
Yeah, it's
really
probably either
the most
changed or
important.
got rid of stuff that was there.
Definitely.
But it's tough doing that sometimes mentally, but it's always exciting when you get that one thing that I feel like every interesting song in the modern world can be summarized with like one small thing, whether it's a vocal lyric idea or a sound or a tone or just like something.
Yeah, definitely. That's what makes it catchy. So
Awesome. So the one other question I had was at 13 seconds, you do this like really cool stutter effect. Um,
yeah, yeah, that was with the guitar.
or yeah, and it looks from that it was some audio chopping, maybe some reversing. Oh yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll play.
Heart
So yeah, that was actually a pretty simple just chop, and that's something I do a lot if I want to create a rhythmic effect like that. Of course, there's other tools and fancy plugins you can reach for, but oftentimes the best thing to do is just grab the audio, start cutting it up, shifting it around. You know, you got this little part here where if I play, it's just a reverse. You
Yeah.
can reverse the audio, throw that in there, and
It's really cool. Yeah, it sounded to me like it was some sort of filter, or I just learned of some new plugin like Infiltrator 2,
oh, yep.
something like an automated chopper sampler, but shows you that pretty much anyone in any DAW that has audio they've recorded or are sampling could do this kind of effect just from chopping. And
Yeah, definitely. And I have all those kind of stutter effect plugins too, and they have their place. Um, More often, if I'm trying to keep a pattern going out throughout an entire section or a build or something, I'll reach for one of those because doing it over that long of a period would be tedious. But
yeah,
if
I
you want
think
to create something for a transition really quick, I think this is the way to go.
yeah, I like the other ones just for when I just want an idea. Those things are kind of like
Yeah.
to understand what comes out. So sometimes if you feel like it's stale or you're like, I just don't know what to do, sometimes throwing it in there, you're like, oh, whoa, what is that? And it's like a new, exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that's all it is just an idea. And I have a song I'm working on right now where like the whole idea came from throwing one of those plugins on Shaper Box and just like messing around with the rhythmic presets they had. And then
Right.
I ended up replacing it and doing it by hand because it got really hard to get the plugin dialed in enough to get like the clicks and stuff out. But just like generating that idea was enough
Right.
to
Yeah. The computer in many ways is like an extra person to bounce ideas off, like a bandmate that changes it and you're like, whoa, what happened? But I was just going to say, I'm a huge fan of doing fills and effects in songs that are truly organic, meaning like you're making them from something that's already in the song. I think
yeah, that's
makes it match the mix. It also is just kind of cool. Like it's ear candy,
yeah,
makes
probably your best tool when you're working on a song is the sounds you already have in there. I think a lot of people are too quick to reach for a new synth or a new patch or a new plugin and layer a new sound when really you can just take something you already have, chop it up a little bit, process it a little bit differently, and now you have a sound that's already familiar to the listener, but it's different enough to to keep the song interesting, and you know it's going to fit well because it's, part of your original palette. It's kind of like if you think about an artist creating a painting, they're starting with a limited range of colors, and um, they're not reaching out and grabbing 200 colors. They're kind of reaching with what they have with their palette. And once you're,
Sure.
you know,
And I think that right there is the hard thing about producing music in the modern world is like we have so many tools that
too many,
all know
way too
it.
many tools.
People that are good but new to producing will sometimes have good ideas there, but there's just too much happening and fighting. And I think like the really, less is more. Again, what I was saying about the real idea, like something that is not just catchy, but something interesting that then everything else is supporting is kind of like where it's at. And
Yeah.
a really great job with that on this song. Um, so thank you so much for showing us your session. It's something that I would love to see more and more producers doing, and I encourage everybody that saw this to follow you on your social media. Again, this is Saulz, and to listen to your other music. There's lots of really cool stuff there, and also your remix of d.r.u and Pip Lewis. But I wanted to ask you, I guess the final thing, do you have anything else you'd like to share with the track? And
No, I don't think so, but happy to answer any more questions if they come up from your listeners. Feel free to send them over, and I'm happy to do a follow up or answer any more specific questions about specific sounds in the song. I'm definitely not like a gatekeeper or anything. I will hand away any techniques used in any of my tracks. I love sharing that knowledge. So
very cool. Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for doing this and for that. And I guess the last question I didn't get to was, in general, with this song or anything else, what do you think the big obstacle is? Like once you finish a song, getting it, like how do you get it to people, or what kind of challenges are there as an independent artist?
yeah, I mean, there's the really obvious ones. There's money. Good marketing costs good money. Um, there's time as an independent artist. I have to split my time between producing and mixing and mastering and recording the vocals and editing the vocals and everything. And all that stuff starts to take up a lot of time. So finding the time to stay active on social media and to market that release, and to do all the work after the song is actually complete and uploaded to distribution is probably the most challenging part. And I know that's not a very specific
No,
answer, but just marketing as a whole is something that's very difficult for a lot of creatives, I think.
I think it's helpful for everyone to hear that, but also I think it's important to, with the conversation we just had, to just highlight that all the different caps that you're already filling in just the song that you made. You're the recording engineer, you tracked the vocal, you're the editor, you mixed it, you're the guitar player, you played on it, you mixed it and get it all polished, and then us as artists, we're supposed to be these marketing people. And I know there's always the side, like marketing takes money, but in addition to that, it's also just knowing how and where to push yourself. And one of my goals with talking to my fellow producers like you is to bring light to other musicians. And there's this just lie or incorrect thought in music that like the right songs rise and we end up hearing them because good songs get shared, and once a song is shared enough, we'll all find out about it. There are examples of that, but there's a lot of work that independent musicians have to put in to get their music heard. And in many ways, that's the very value that labels can provide to artists, is helping them do the things, even facilitating recording and songs and stuff like that. But anyway, thank you again for talking to us about that. And I hope that this video right here helps you to promote the song. The song, is going to be new to so many people until they hear it. And we've got a lot of people to show it to. So if you like Let You Lie, help us all out and share this, post it to your social media, make an Instagram story with it, whatever. Remember to support independent music. It is good for your soul and the music in the world around you. But thank you so much for hanging out. If you found this helpful, subscribe to the channel. Till next time. Cheers. Drew
Thank you.
out and Saul signing off.